and how to balance development goals with citywide needs and local interests. So I am Margot Jaffa, Regional Manager with All Steel, and I am the chair of our Cornet Public Policy Committee. And I will introduce the speakers. So moderating today will be Dan Kaplan. Dan Kaplan is a senior partner with FX Collaborative Architects. He serves in design and a leadership capacity for many of the firm's complex and award-winning projects and buildings. Dan is an urbanist architect, and his passion is the crafting of compelling buildings and spaces that add up to great and enduring neighborhoods. Our other speakers include Basha Gerhardt, who is the Senior Vice President for Planning for the Real Estate Board of New York, where she oversees issues such as housing, land use, zoning, landmarks, community development, climate adaptation and resiliency, and retail and streetscape conditions. Prior to joining REBNY in 2018, Basha served as the Manhattan Borough President and Gail Brewer's Senior Land Use Advisor. Also joining us today is Council Member Keith Powers. Keith represents New York City's Council District 4, spanning the east side of Manhattan and Midtown. In this time in office, Council Member Powers has introduced and passed legislation to make it easier to run for office, prevent tenants from unlawful eviction, broaden sexual harassment protections, and protect small business. He also chairs the East Midtown Governing Group, charged with oversight of improving public space and transportation in the area. Also joining us today is Miriam Harris, who is the Executive Vice President of Trinity Place Holdings. In this role, she directs all aspects of the community's real estate business, including the development of Jolie on Greenwich, a 300,000 square foot mixed-use luxury condominium, retail and elementary school projects in Lower Manhattan, as well as the acquisitions, sales, leasing, and asset management of properties in the New York tri-state area. A seasoned real estate executive, Miriam has over 25 years experience in the industry, and prior to leading real estate for Trinity Partners, she served as the Executive Vice President and co-head of the Real Estate Transaction Services Group for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where she negotiated some of the most complex, transformational public-private land development deals executed under the Bloomberg administration, such as the Cornet Tech Campus and Essex Crossing. And now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Dan to begin the discussion.
Thank you so much, Margot, and thank you everybody for joining us. Good afternoon. I want to thank Cornet for reaching out to us to set this up. And I really want to start out by thanking my co-panelists here, all really stellar people, very busy. Council Member Powers, thank you. Basha Gerhardt, thank you so much. And Miriam Harris, thank you as always. I'm just going to tee it off really quickly and then get into the questions. If you have questions, put it in the chat. And I think Margot will try to assimilate them. But we will certainly leave time for Q&A at the end. So this year, as everybody, it's no news to anybody that this year has been a little bit crazy and nuts, and the coming year is going to turn out to be, I think, one of the most pivotal in our city's history. We all know the challenges of the pandemic and how hard it was to families and our communities and our businesses. And as we, I think, collectively as design professionals and as people in the real estate industry and others really begin the hard work of really repairing the social and economic damage of COVID-19. I think we all have the realization that the pandemic really didn't cause a lot of the ills, but really exacerbated the underlying ills. And so it's an opportunity. I think the pandemic, of course, really also demonstrated the resilience of our community and the city and its people. So this coming year, we will have a new mayor with a fresh administration. Council member Powers will have probably 3/4 of his council be new, fresh faces, eager to go. We have in Washington, D.C., a new administration that seems more focused on urban policies and more supportive, and are backing their policies up so far with money. So at this juncture, how do we get the city we want as we really rework to improve it? So today we want to discuss, as Margot said, what are the opportunities and challenges of city building in this period? What are the big land use and zoning initiatives? What are the barriers, and what role does the government play? So before I get into the questions, I just want to also say that Cornet has an amazing constituency. You all are wonderful people, and between design professionals, clients, corporations, furniture suppliers, contractors, and usually the dialogue in Cornet is what happens with inside the building. But as we all know, it's impossible to separate that from what happens outside the four walls of a building. So we need to get into those issues and to see how we can make things better. So with that, I'll start off the questions and the dialogue, and I'm going to first direct the question to Councilmember Power. In the things we can agree upon category, the amazing reimagining of our streets and sidewalks and outdoor dining and culture has been one of the silver linings of the pandemic. And I'm very curious to know, where do you see this going? Where do you see the Open Streets program going? Is this whole thing a fad? Or do you see 5-10 years from now, a visitor who hasn't been in the city for a while come back and say, well, wow, look how different it feels? Or maybe a visitor, or even a real estate executive who's looking for, in terms of location executive. How does the public realm, how do you see the public realm?
Sure. Thank you for focusing on that. I think we're going to really figure out all the legacies from the federal level in terms of expansion of safety net down to the city level when it comes to open space and other things we've done during the pandemic. We're going to figure out exactly how much of an expansion of government or programs this is, but we won't probably know that for a couple of years from now. I think this is open dining, as an example, I think is probably here to stay. Is more durable than some of the other things because it matches. It's just a perfect meshing and matching of what the public wants, I think, generally, which is to be able to have more space and be outside, a way to help businesses out. If you recall, like businesses as restaurants reopen, and let's say in a year from now, they basically double their footprint for the same price of the rent, at least for the time being. So it's a major boost to them, for some period of time. So I think that's likely here to stay, but we're already running into issues where, as we think about the long-term, a long-term program, that we are hearing from neighbors and communities that are saying, well, wait a second, this has been a little disruptive to me. I don't love it. There's pockets of opposition. So I think we're going to have to figure exactly how to structure that out. But I do think that's here to stay. On open streets, I think there is a version of that will stay. But I will say, I think the open streets program has been great. But the one right across the street from my house, as an example, cars still go down it sometimes. I mean, you have to if you're going to do it, you have to do it. You have to actually close the street down and make it a public space all the way. It can't be volunteer driven. It can't be, you can't be able to sort of negotiate the barriers. But I think you'll see a program like that will stay. I think it makes sense in the areas, I represent Koreatown, some of the main areas of outdoor dining, I think would be good ones to shut down for, non-essential traffic or traffic period, and really make it dining and people. I think some of the other ones we'll probably see a little bit of scaling back on some of the other ones, but I think outdoor dining and outdoor open streets are going to be here to stay. And I think you're going to see the next mayor probably come in with some plan or program around, open space and parks and things like that, because they're starting to talk about that as part of the campaigns for mayor.
That's really great. I mean, in addition to what you said about let's say neighbor impact. What are the other things you see as these things sort of go from sort of temporary pop-up to more of a permanent condition? Surely there's, you brought up the question of, doubling the footprint of a restaurant. Do you think there should be some sort of compensation or sharing or
So there's a couple of challenges with outdoor dining long term. One is, permanent, like you're going to put these permanent structures there that are going to need to be removed at some point to do street cleaning and utility relocation or utility work and to get into the street. So I think there might be a version of that program that's more warm weather focused or something that, creates opportunity to get into the streets as you really kind of need them. And also, I think you're going to see leases probably start reflecting out, I would think, more good outdoor space. A corner spot is now worth a lot even more. So I think you might see a difference. I'll let the real estate folks tell me if I'm wrong about that, but I think that might be the case. And you're going to have to see some regulation around hours and things like that. The one thing I would add in, and then I'll shut up, is I think that one of the good things about outdoor dining was that there was no real burdens to get into the program. They stood it up really quick. They mostly left. I mean, there was enforcement on certain parts, but they mostly left enforcement. They were pretty hands off about it, and they got it up and running. To get outdoor dining normally in New York City, you have to go to the city council and get approved. You have to go through a whole ULURP process. The mayor's office is proposing to, I think, repeal that now and to make outdoor dining less like the sidewalk cafes and outdoor dining, to streamline that, which is a good idea because it's silly to get a sidewalk cafe that you have to go through months of a process to do it, especially when we have this new program that can get up and running really quick. So I think like bureaucratic ease might be something that we could try to, learn a little bit in this as well.
That's such a great point, because I think one of the things that I think people really responded to and react to is just the inventiveness and the spontaneity of it, and and the good energy around that. And that doesn't happen when you have to do, as you say, like an 18-month process to get a sidewalk permit for
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's such a good point. Another, I'm going to direct this one towards Basha. And I mean, another sort of surprising outcome of this whole situation has been, all of a sudden our building, our office building stock, right? And what's going on with that, and the resistance at some points or other to, especially in Midtown East, for conversions from office to residential and so forth. And now there's legislation being proposed that will take, I don't know if folks saw it in the Times about a month ago of I think it was Kimmelman, who's the critic, commissioned somebody to reimagine some generic 1960s Madison Avenue office building into something that looked like a Bushwick, a Bushwick vibe place, and there's legislation out there that actually can make that happen. So I would love to hear from you in terms of what your members are thinking about that, and the likelihood and the pitfalls and the opportunities, and I'd love to get some color on that.
Thanks, Dan. How much time do we have, right? So let's go big picture for a moment before we get into specifics. What is the role a convergence policy could play, and what's the value it can add to our city? A convergence policy is not a quick fix that will transform the offices into, I think at one point in the questions you had sent us, like a hip Bushwick apartment. We're actually not looking to do this in Bushwick, one. So for the planners amongst us, the neighborhood names matter. We're not looking to transfer neighborhoods. Neighborhoods should be unique and special. It is not based on the idea that Manhattan offices are just going to go away due to the pandemic. There is still a very vital place for office space in our central business districts and in Midtown. It's also not a new concept. It was done successfully in Lower Manhattan, and I'll speak to that a bit more in a moment. So convergence policy, if done well, is an opportunity to think long-term about how to strengthen our central business districts into the 21st century with a dynamic 24/7 live, work, play environment. And an important part of that environment is going to be both perception and reality in terms of quality of life, whether that's safety, effective and just law enforcement, compassionate and effective care for New Yorkers experiencing homelessness. Some of those outdoor dining spaces have been fantastic, but they're also next to a trash compactor, or the way our trash is collected on the streets, or how do you get freight and deliveries in? These are all issues that need to get sorted out, but this is a good opportunity to have those kind of broader conversations. I think Convergence is also an opportunity for us to continuing positioning New York City as a global leader and making our central business districts more attractive to major commercial tenants. If you have active street life, if you have a variety of uses and users and people, that creates a better office environment as well. And I think for those of us who were in Midtown office buildings and you went out and you saw the same type of activity, right? Like there's something that to be said for seeing something different when you walk outside the door, whether it's your home door or your office door. We also think it's a real opportunity to help address New York City's housing needs, which have existed for decades before the pandemic. So if this isn't a new concept and there's lessons to be learned, we know it was hugely successful in Lower Manhattan after market challenges coming into the 90s. It was based on smart long-term planning. It made the math work. This was really important in terms of both the public and private sectors collaborating and the use of an abatement program to help for the cost of these conversions. And we can still see positive results today. There's also lessons to be learned on what not to do, right? There's a lot of legitimate criticisms around 421G and what that meant for stabilization and long-term affordability for some of the units that were created. So that brings us back to right now, in this moment, what are the policies on the table? Again, going back to this idea, like office stock is not going away and commercial tenants still want it. We specifically suggested focusing on Class B and C office space because we still believe there's high demand, and we're seeing high demand for Class A. A CBRE analysis found nearly 3 million square feet of commercial lease signings in Q1 2021. This is the best quarter of leasing since the start of the pandemic. Out of the nearly 3 million square feet of leasing in Q1, more than 1.3 million took place in March alone. So that's making it the best month of leasing since the start of the pandemic. So again, this isn't about a glut of office space. This is about how do we reposition the office space that could be used maybe in a better way or a different way. There's also a lot of really active commercial tenants in the market, and we really see leasing activity improving. So if there's office space that we need to keep and office space that we can maybe use something different. On the office space, we can use something different. This is not a one-for-one conversion on hotel rooms. Transforming large floor plate office buildings is complicated and takes a lot of time and management of a wide array of moving parts. So does any of the legislation do this? And does any of the legislation make the math work? So unfortunately, none of the proposals that are currently out there are perfect and really acknowledge all of these three components of making the math work, remembering that conversions are difficult, and acknowledging that there's a certain universe of office space that isn't going to convert. This isn't necessarily the big influx. It is an opportunity. So one of the budget proposals was from the governor himself, and this contemplated private and public sector involvement. It did not contemplate an abatement program. It addressed some of the zoning challenges that come from the conversions of these in terms of light and air standards, distance between windows, and some of more like the technical pieces, including density and floor area. You had another proposal that basically looked at the creation of a new set of single room occupancy SROs. Now, the city itself has moved away from that policy, but there's a lot in the housing world who think we should go back to making new SROs, but in a better way, in a better, I want to say like a higher quality standard. And then there's a third proposal sponsored by Senator Gianaris that specifically only looked at hotels and office buildings really outside of the central business district. And remember, our concept was we want 24/7 neighborhoods in the central business district and excludes the private sector. None of these proposals passed during the budget session. They are still, I think, in some level of play and in consideration, and $100 million was set aside for a pilot. And again, I want to go back to this idea of the math working. $100 million may purchase a single building, a unicorn of a building that could be transferred for 100% supportive housing by a nonprofit partner. And I wish that entity a lot of luck with that pot of money, given all the challenges I've outlined.
That's really great, and it's pivots me just perfectly to Miriam. Miriam, you've worn two hats in your career so far, on the public side and on the development side. How do you see incentives as part of like the package? If we think about sort of three legs of the stool, there's the quality of life issues in the public open space, and maybe what Bosch was just saying about changing the zoning rules of the game a little bit in this bureaucratic ease that the council member said, as the second leg of the stool. Is there a real role here for government in terms of incentives? You're on mute. Yeah. Of course, that's going to happen.
Of course there is, and that's what Basha was speaking to, making the math work, and the math doesn't work now. But I'm not optimistic that that will happen at all. So I'm very sort of realistic that there is no proposal to add incentives. As I think most of us know, the Amazon project highlighted what's really hard for folks like me, or maybe even Basha, to swallow, folks in the economic and development and real estate field, that currently in the conversation, there is no discussion or feeling that there's a distinction between as of right incentives and subsidy. And because of that, we can't have a real conversation about the right number, because there is no right number then. We're just giving money to people, and that's not what we should be doing. And since we're in that situation, we are even in a place where 421A, once again, in a very short amount of time is in play and might leave us at the, affordable New York program for residential. And putting aside what the right amount of incentive is, by redoing these incentives on very fast timelines for the real estate industry, it really, it freezes projects, it freezes planning, and we just, our process, which is already methodical in a good way, I would argue, in terms of ULURP and things like that, becomes even slower. You can't even do an as of right, which is considered a faster project. And when you're in a post-COVID world where we're trying to recover quickly, we're not giving people the tools to do that. We also, a lot of the proposals, the $100 million for that one building, there's a sense that the answer is always direct subsidy. But that direct subsidy is desperately needed for deeply affordable projects. But we need all kinds of housing, and we need those two things to work together. And we need to preserve that subsidy when we have it, and maybe we have it now because of stimulus in the stock market, but we're not going to have it next year or the year after. I mean, that's sort of guaranteed. We save that for the deeply affordable projects. And then, there's a discussion that, maybe New York, COVID, the silver linings. It's more affordable now, rents have gone down. I think we're seeing that that's a momentary blip. And the market is still very tight because we have so few housing units where people want to live here. I actually think next week will be in a moment in time where everyone starts coming back. We've been seeing it in the rental market, the increase in absorption. I think we'll see it in Midtown, and we'll surely see it in Lower Manhattan with city workers coming back. And our market's going to get tight again, and we're not giving people the tools to create new housing units or new opportunities for people. Long term, I think that the key is to make, if you are going to have incentives, and they should be sized properly, I think that time period for them, the lifelines for them should be longer than they are now, so that they can actually be implemented and truly be as of right. I also think that Basha mentioned it, there were a lot of problems with 421G, but if you do look on it over a historical period, it's the reason that Lower Manhattan now is truly live work. It started it, it established it as a place where you could live. And now because of that, folks like Dan and I are building, brand new residential units there that don't have funky layouts, so that people can, more people can live down there. And in that sense, Lower Manhattan might have more stability over long-term than the central CBD at this moment.
Miriam,
And while
I'm sorry, Miriam, do you just want to define 421G for the audience so that it's clear?
I think Basha can do it better than I can, but it was part of that combination of zoning and tax incentives. It was the tax incentive part of the Lower Manhattan Revitalization Plan, which was to take older office buildings and convert them to residential.
Perfect.
And it was the tax incentive component of it. And I think it really is what started the Renaissance downtown. And I do think that Class B and C office buildings, which the city talked about this for so long, and there's a whole rezoning in East Midtown to accommodate upgrading Class B and C office buildings. But we have to expand that, not just how to build new office buildings, but how to convert them, because I think that there will be less demand for office space of that type, as Basha noted. Class A coming back, we're seeing that people will come back, but maybe these other buildings are really going to need that, and they're going to need the incentives to do it. And I think they're going to need a longer time horizon. If I understand these proposals correctly, they're quite short. They're saying, we have COVID, we have an emergency, people need help now. That's not how real estate works. And that's not how creating stable neighborhoods really works either.
That's so great. I just want to follow up on that to the council member. Your district is obviously includes both East and West Midtown, so this is obviously probably top of mind for you. And I would love to get your perspective on A, what this whole conversion situation, and B, just what Miriam was saying about the incentives.
Sure. Two things. One is I generally agree that we should be looking at, creating more flexibility here in our building stock to be able to look at different uses. And we should do it, we shouldn't, just rush to do it. We have to do it very kind of carefully to balance the uses, recognizing that where we are exactly today is not where we'll be in a couple of years, with hotels still needed for tourism and still going to hopefully have workers showing up to work and needing also. And I've been encouraged by the fact that I represent East Midtown, and we still see lots of projects that are coming through. We have some really big ones, and of course want to get those projects done to sort of both stimulate the economy here, put people to work, but also create new modernized spaces in this area. One thing we have been looking at is that component of after work, what do people do? Because Midtown East particularly is predominantly a workers area. And then, you have kind of like the east of 3rd Avenue area, sort of residential and, other areas. But you can see right in the core of it is predominantly commercial and residential. We've been doing a lot to incentivize new development there, but what we are actually looking at is trying to create more spaces in there that are like after hour spaces. Obviously that's good dining and stuff like that, but we're looking for ways to try to keep people around or make it a little more destination driven outside of the work hours. And we've been kind of kicking around ideas how to do that, in addition to making an attractive place to actually work. And on incentives, look, I think like the best incentives are one that don't cost a lot of money and are ones where we do kind of create some flexibility to look at different uses here. I would just always warn that, like, we don't want to over respond or overreact to this moment either. We do want to kind of think about what our long-term needs are here in the city, but housing is always a need. So if we're looking at supportive housing and, any opportunity to kind of create more and new modernized housing is always always something I look favorably on in terms of new uses.
Yeah.
I think that's a good opportunity to distinguish between direct subsidy dollars and an abatement program. A lot like 421G is an abatement program. Affordable New York is an abatement program. This is about foregone tax revenue versus the state or the city government writing a check for however many dollars to give cash, right? Cash to the developer or to the owner to do the public good. And I think a lot of times that gets confused in these conversations or kind of lumped together, and they're very different in how they operate. And to the council member's point, right? Like there are certain guardrails that should and can be put in place. It is very good for a legislative body to reevaluate these programs on a regular basis. And to Miriam's point, though, are we asking him to reevaluate on too short a time frame to really see proof positive of, is the program parameters you set 3 years ago working? And I would argue 3 years is really not a long time, especially when we think about a development pipeline or as urban planners, right? Like 3 years, you set up a plan for 40. So, somewhere between 3 and 40 sounds probably better, sandbox for where we should be playing with these different programs. And how do we get there so that we can actually see, is this a good concept? Are we getting the public good back on these public dollars, whether it's an abatement or the direct subsidy?
Yeah, and also avoiding, the cycle of this is really important. Many of us are living right now through the 421A sunset cycle, and I've seen like 3 or 4 of these now in my career, where it's like, got to get that foundation in the ground, and it's sort of, and it creates these sort of artificial rushes, in terms of the market. So interesting. Miriam sort of touched on it, and I want to expand on it a little bit. It's just the general societal or our city's culture of development and attitude around it. And we are not just develop, but also just city civic improvement. How do you do things in the public realm? Obviously it's a boisterous, contentious place to live and to work and to do anything, and there's a lot of competing interests. But it does seem in the last few years things have gotten particularly hot in temperature. So, I guess my question is, what's good about what we do in terms of ULURP and land use and governance, and what are some good examples of where things have succeeded, and what's gone off the rails? I mean, and why, and what can we do to correct? So I'll just do a round robin, and I'll start with the council member, and we'll go through the sort of same council member, then Basha, and then Miriam.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough question. I think that most of what we do in the land use process is disliked by most of the stakeholders, and that it might be an argument for why parts of it actually really work. It does put pressure on people to make decisions. It kind of creates pressure on developers to, come up with a project that gets closer to what folks want. It's not perfect, but the replacement policies have not always also been perfect either. I do support what the council's been talking about a little bit, which is to have like a process a little bit outside of ULURP to talk about long-term planning, to look at what we need in terms of housing and infrastructure and things like that, like a more comprehensive process that at least sets up goals, and then you can do ULURPs and do other projects through that lens of whether it's kind of meeting what the need is. And I think, but I do have noticed, I think different people have different impressions of what that really means for them, doing something more comprehensive. But I think there is probably a role here for doing planning that's not one at a time. But to the point of the ULURP process, I mean, right now, the kind of one of the big discussion points is the council members, in particular council members' role in that process, and whether they should be kind of the defining actor in that process, because normally we defer to the, there's a lot of deference to the member who represents that area. On some of these large scale projects, I think we have to break that, because we do need to do economic development in this city, and we can't leave it all up to one person to make that decision for the city of New York. And also in some of these areas, we want to, we've been talking this whole time, and I think it's right to say, like, we want areas outside of East Midtown. I love Midtown, I represent it, but it can't be the only economic hub of New York City. And so, everybody deserves to live 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or a short subway ride from the job if there's an opportunity for that. So I would like us to look at, ways to incentivize people to be able to work closer to their house, good transportation options, good opportunities. That comes with at the price of doing some ULURPs. And so it's not easy, but I think sometimes we are losing focus on the need to be the only thing I'll say about New York is more than other cities kind of constantly redefining itself. You don't see, you go downtown Manhattan, you do see a lot of pieces of our history there, but it's not like we have a historic district downtown Manhattan. We have built around it. We've built a commercial hub and residential hub there where our sort of the history of our city sort of started. It's because we evolve. And so we can't stop doing that. And I think we have in the last couple of years had a little bit of a mixed identity when it comes to housing and what we need, and also how that plays out in the council when it comes to and jobs and everything else and also how that plays out in real time. And I think that's development is the hardest part of being a council member, but it's arguably one of the most important.
Interesting. That's super interesting. Thank you for that. I mean, what you're really talking about is the tension between the whether it's in this sort of ULURP planning you're talking about, or the role of the entire council versus a single council member. It's the tension between the top down and the bottom up, or the collective versus the individual district.
Well, if you're doing a ULURP right now, there's no really way to kind of get a measurement of what the need is in your area or need is citywide. When it comes, but this plays out in every issue: homeless shelters, to school seats, to public transportation. There's no great measurements always. I mean, there are for sure, but we don't always get, when we do a ULURP, sort of I'll be able to look at what are the needs and what are the stress points in your area, right. And so, or in the city. And so we know we have a housing shortage. We know we have a need to create better public transportation, all this stuff. And I think when we do the one-off ULURPs, developer has their particular pressures, the financing of the project, the constraints of the zoning, things like that. And we have our needs, but we don't have a great way to always kind of look at them outside of that process. So I think trying to create some better visibility into the needs of the city as we're doing those projects would be really helpful, I think.
Basha, you want to respond?
Where to start? All right, so ULURP projects, it's about 20% between the rezonings and individual projects, 20% of our housing construction. That means 80% as of right. I would be incredibly concerned if that ratio starts to flip in any way. And I think that's what starts tripping up the conversation when we start talking about comprehensive planning and what does it mean and what it could do. So there are very fair criticisms with the current process in terms of, to the council member's point, right? Like there's this mismatch between neighborhood need and city need. And I think Industry City was a perfect example of this, where you started having council members say, hey, wait a minute, there's a city need that could be fulfilled by this project. And is this the type of decision? What's the threshold decision that really should defer to the council member? So the bill that the council member was referring to, the comprehensive planning legislation that's currently in the city council, there's a number of very positive things in there. It says infrastructure services and land use planning should be coordinated. Great. Stakeholders at all levels of government should have input into the planning process. Couldn't agree more. New York City should strive to advance public and land use policies that promote racial and economic equality. Yes. Policymakers should make decisions based on facts and data. That would be fantastic. So very good things. But then we get to the meat of what they're proposing here, an entirely new planning agency, an entirely new environmental review process. It does not actually eliminate discretionary council member deference. So this tension point is not actually addressed in this plan at all. And we believe because it does not address that tension point, it is doomed to fail in a lot of ways. And because it doesn't remove that individual deference or really address it in a way in terms of that citywide framework, we just think this introduces an additional layer of review for discretionary applications. It's just one more stage gate someone has to go through, and it doesn't really guarantee or really and when I say guarantee, there should not be a guarantee that when you go through a ULURP, you're going to get a yes or a no, right? The whole point of a ULURP is this project going to be made better through this process? Is this proposal going to be made better through community review and engagement? And how does this fit within the goals of the neighborhood and the greater city? And it's way it's structured right now, it's not clear you get through both the comprehensive planning process, one, because of the timetable it sets up a 10-year cycle. And going back to the earlier conversation, is that sufficient time to see things play out? And it doesn't really reconcile those existing community-driven plans. It doesn't reconcile other statutory strategic plans, and it doesn't reconcile other legislation that looks at discrete challenges such as fair housing or racial impacts. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's the right conversation we need to be having when we're talking about long-term recovery and resiliency for the city.
And I just I'm going to rebut for a second, but I do agree with Bosch on most of this. I agree on most of this. And I think there's more gatekeeping that needs to be removed from that. And also potentially more lawsuits based on the comprehensive planning framework that it would lead to less stuff. So I agree with you on that. I just think that whether you like the bill or not, there needs to be some conversation around planning that does not happen with council members and communities involved. Because when we get to the actual projects, we have to be able to say to I'm saying it more kind of like from a pro-housing standpoint, which is we need to be able to, address a housing shortage, and we need to be able to have conversations about what that looks like in the city right now, and have a process that's not on a clock, to be part of that conversation. So I agree with you on a lot of it. Yeah,
I mean, for a city of our size, the amount of actual planning that happens is quite small when you compare around the world.
Yeah.
Miriam, you've been involved in some pretty successful redevelopments in ULURP. I'd love to get your perspective on things.
Sure. I mean, I think, and I'm speaking personally, but personally through processes I've seen, whether it's a private applicant or the city is doing a ULURP, the ones that have been successful have been when they have sponsored throughout, way before the ULURP, a very in-depth public outreach program, but also one that in turn, that the council member and the community board has in turn given that group representatives of the community to talk to, not just 1,000 public presentations. When a developer or even the city sometimes says, we did 1,000 conversations, we listened to 30,000 people. That's not what a successful ULURP is. When it's done well, and I saw it done well, when I saw colleagues of mine working on it on that Seward Park project or in East Midtown, is when they gather a group of stakeholders together who understand all the complexity, who are community members, but also because of their volunteerism and experience in the community, understand the complexities of development. And honestly, those people, even without the tools of comprehensive planning, which would be great for them, sort of understand the conflict and the interface between the local and the citywide needs, and they help you hash it out. And I think you find in those instances that either the city, if they do it prior to a developer getting involved, or even with private applicants, when they're given the tools, they respond, and then the ULURP process works better. I think the ULURP process is not broken. I think that there are ways to execute on it better, and I think that's a key component of it. I know in Seward Park, for example, it was not just the community board who worked with EDC on the land use and planning of the master plan. It was a smaller group of key stakeholders that really the whole community could get on board, that these people represented them, and they were very knowledgeable volunteers. And their voices were heard and implemented. And that's that. And I think what you see at Essex Crossing right now represents that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I think the theme really resonates with what Basha and the council member said about, it's the dialogue up front is what I think we're all that's missing sometimes in these contentious processes, and the sort of, the facts and the sort of background and, paving the way. That's interesting. I mean, one of the things that makes me, I've been involved in ULURPs all through now all 5 boroughs, and sort of on a granular, on the ground basis. And the spectrum of, let's say, land use, experience and insight and competency, let's say, amongst those leaders varies tremendously across the whole city. So Jamaica Queens versus, Community Board 4 on the west side of Manhattan are very different type of just exposures and histories. So I think they're.
I totally agree with you. Just another example, I did a volunteer technical assistance program with the ULI.
Yeah.
And we went to the South Bronx and we did something related to the new potential soccer stadium. And it was sponsored, the community board asked for this support because they felt like they didn't have enough expert tools to have that early conversation that they knew they wanted to have, because they felt they hadn't had it before. Yankee Stadium was not that was not a process that they feel good about. It didn't work for them. But they said, we need help, and ULI brought technical assistance. That's all outside of ULURP. That's not the city. I don't know if the city can help with that or needs to, but that conversation really helps the stakeholders who matter have an active role, and which is vital for success.
Right, and give them the resources for sure. I want to leave some time for Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left, so if there's Margot or Carolina, there's questions, we'd love to get them from the audience.
Well, we have a couple, but while we're potentially getting more from the audience, do you want to pose another question to the panelists?
Sure. So this is the easy one. We've gone through some. Actually, I have to say, in terms of dialogue and everything, we've covered some pretty good subjects. But one of the things in terms of this group of CoreNet, and the people on the phone or on the Zoom, I should say, given CoreNet's like constituency and interests, what are some of the ways that, from our past, what is some of the ways that they can get involved, and what are some of the routes that they could have in terms of having impact as we pivot to this economic recovery and post-pandemic, and not just economic, social recovery time? So.
Well, one is we have a big elections this year. You should definitely vote and make sure you kind of put your marker on candidates that you think match your, ideological bend, or people you like to see governing the city. That you're going to have mayor down to city council running this year, and I'm one of the few who's returning. So most districts where you live are going to have an open seat, a big opportunity to talk about your community. Mayor's race being the biggest one because it's really about the future of the city here. But I have folks, join community boards, which are part of the planning process, and, get involved in their block associations or form association, or, there's new, more ideological, or issue related groups. So, there's always kind of an aspiration, I think, to be more part of civic life, and also time is of the essence for everyone. But hopefully, maybe we have a little time on our hands these days. Yeah, look, I think vote, get involved and start paying attention. There's a couple of weeks left till the election on June 22nd for the primary, which will probably decide the race. So, certainly get yourself acquainted with the mayoral candidates and your city council candidates, and go out and vote. And that is the council member, as we were saying, is a big part of the equation when it comes to planning and land use. So that's a big one. But I'll leave to others to add into that.
And I would just say, get acquainted with what ranked choice voting means. Get educated, right? So that's not. Go ahead, Basha.
No, I was going to say, I couldn't agree more. The number one thing you could do is go vote for the June primaries. It's such a critical election for the future of our city. Like the next mayor is going to be the one setting the policy goals, the interpretations, even may or may not have a better relationship with the governor or whoever that's going to be, right? Like there's a lot of things in play, and we need someone who understands the math, right? And understands the interests. Like, this group is a constituency, and I think that gets lost. And I'd also say a lot of these elections traditionally, whether it's for a local council race or for the mayor, historically, we're not talking about wide margins of winning here. Some of these seats are decided by dozens of people. And I think, again, the number one thing you can do is go vote. The second thing, attend a community board meeting. If none of you have attended in a personal capacity, whatever your passion is outside of your work, that is a good place to explore. And I think one of the things that always comes up is, a number of elected officials refuse donations from the industry or from the real estate. And I always bristle at that a bit, because I'm not just my job, and neither of any are you, right? Where our families, where our faith, where our communities, where our neighborhoods, where whatever drives you to get up in the morning, whether it's walking along the river and an open space or the design. And voting is the way that you make your constituency and your voice heard.
That's great. Miriam, do you want to add anything?
I would only say that what just happened with the census, if nothing else, would surely woke me up for sure.
What was it? 89 people decided.
89.
That was-
89.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, 89, we lost a congressional seat by 89 not votes, but I guess census measurement population.
Yeah.
So there was a great question, which I think is really interesting, and it was from, I don't know, it's what are the potential fears that you have as we head towards the new normal? Which that was cool. What could happen?
Yeah. I think my fear is twofold. One is that we, not the basics of public health, people don't get enough vaccinations, and we see another surge or wave or variants or something like that, and we rush to go back to normal, and we find out that was a mistake. And that's a mistake because we have vaccines and people need to go get them. And second is, I think this is an opportunity to be creative and kind of reimagine the city a bit, to break things that are broke, to really break things that are broken and fix them. And that there might not be the political will at times to do that, or the creativity to do that. And I think the mayor's race happening now is maybe only, fortunate in the sense that we can think about the city as what we need exactly at this moment, versus this sort of so it's happening at the end of one mayor administration, but we have a new one coming in, and we can address the new normal maybe a little bit. But I think as we're talking about voting, what I'm looking for, I think others are too, is like a little creativity and ideas for how to sort of do, how to rebuild the city or reconstruct the city. And I think my fear would be where, breaking the status quo is quite tough in the city, and we need to, I'm ready to build some political around that, but I think we need to have a little political will to do that.
Great. That's great. Like, take advantage of the loosening up of things to really not lose that new spirit, right?
Yeah, I think it's right.
Basha? Yeah.
Mindy, William, well, I'll give the speakers an opportunity to answer that question as well, but we have a couple other questions too.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that answer?
No, normally I say I don't prescribe to feelings, I prescribe to facts, but I think that the concern is that we're gonna have leadership that gets kind of bogged down into the rhetoric, and we're not using this as an opportunity to reset, not just how we build or how we design and how we interact, but how we plan and how do we set policy. And are we going to see leadership there and creativity there? And that's certainly the hope. I want to turn this fear to hope, right? That's my hope. I think that's the hope for many of us on the call, that, the value of the design professionals and the industry will be seen, and will be seen as a partner to solve a lot of the problems that the pandemic really exacerbated.
That's great.
Thank you. Mindy Williams had a question. She said, how will expanded outdoor dining affect residential real estate prices, parking for local residents, safety measures for traffic, and I added in trash disposal.
Basha, you want to take the first part? I can maybe talk about the more of the quality of life stuff. The real.
I'd actually defer to Miriam on
Oh, yeah.
Why? Because I parked my car on the street? I mean, you know, I think you made the point that for retail, it'll sort of reset what's valuable. I mean, yes, corners were always valuable, but if you have more outdoor seating, you're going to get more rent. So I think those values will definitely go up. I don't know I don't think it'll have much impact on residential. That's not something that I would really contemplate.
Okay, Basha, go ahead. So.
No, I was just gonna say, right, like if we get the central business district we're dreaming of, right, where conversions have occurred and you're creating new markets for residential, right? What are the impacts going to be on the broader basis? Again, we don't even have a path forward for those conversions to occur, so it's hard to say what's going to happen to pricing. I think I would defer to the council member as well for like parking and safety measures. I think we've all spoken to like these are the exact things that need to get sorted out if this is going to be long-term programming for our streets.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we have to just figure out the months, the hours, how to handle all that stuff, and we haven't done that yet. And that's just why I think we are thinking and talking about a permanent outdoor dining program, but end of the summer, we're going to have to, by the end of summer, I think probably have to come up with a real idea of this looks like. And, I do see a world where we do, I don't know, April to September or something like that, when it's really prime time to be outside, and leave the rest of the months to do construction and stuff like that, or utilities or cleaning and all that. But I will say, like, I think you're going to see a lot of stress. Like, outdoor dining is going to become a feature that's expectedly part of the restaurant, and they're going to pay rents on it. And when you have to do things like closing it down because you're doing new construction next door or something like that, like, that's going to create a real stress on the restaurants on how to deal with that. But I think, we'll have to deal with a little bit in real time. But we have to sort out how to do all that issues, and we haven't done that yet. And I think that's going to have to happen in the summertime to sort those details out.
Yeah, I mean, more practically, it's like, what do you do in a storm event, right? Like
Right.
This theme of climate change, right? Like our storms are more severe. Growing up, it used to be, it would snow very frequently, but it was like 3 to 6 inches. Now it's like, we're going to dump 18 inches on the city and good luck cleaning it up. So I think those are the types of things we have to think through. And even in the nicer weather, what happens when it rains and it's raining very hard, and what does our street infrastructure look like, and what happens to those spaces? So again, this is a good inflection point for how we're going to sort through all of this.
And hopefully we'll have, the congestion pricing will have been enacted. And also, as we're going to return hopefully back to some new normal, but that's going to have also an overlay in terms of perhaps there's less vehicles on the streets. And so there might be a loosening up there. That brings us to our 1 o'clock.
Yes. Can we go over a couple more minutes? Is that okay with the speakers? And then the audience can keep on or drop off.
I actually have to leave, and I want to say thank you so much, but I hope that others can stay, and it was really great to be with this organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. It was
Thank
great
you.
having you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I have to jump as well. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry. I know 1 o'clock was my deadline here.
Yeah.
Well, we will wrap then. Thank
Yeah.
you so much to all of our speakers. This was a wonderful conversation, very informative. So thank you for leading us in that. And thank you to all of our attendees today. Hope you enjoyed the panel, and see you all on another virtual presentation soon. Thank you.
Folks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I guess.
Thank you.